"Get out!" Emily snapped, her voice shaking but steady. "This house belongs to us." Uncle Robert leaned back in Father's old chair, his smile sharp as broken glass. "Us? Emily, you're just a 19-year-old girl with 3 hungry brothers and no money. You can't possibly believe you can hold on to this place." Emily's fists clenched at her sides. "My father built this home for his children, and I won't let you steal it." Charleston, South Carolina, in late autumn, was a city painted with contradictions. The harbor winds carried the sharp scent of salt and damp wood, while streets lined with moss-draped oaks shimmered in the pale light of a sun that seemed reluctant to rise. The air was cool and heavy with mist, clinging to the cobblestones and the facades of old houses. On Bay Street, where the ocean whispered against the breakwaters, stood the Hayes family's home, a modest but proud 2-story house with shutters painted deep blue and a wraparound porch that always smelled faintly of jasmine. It was here that Emily Hayes's world had shattered and where it would soon be ripped away a second time. Emily Hayes was 19 years old, with long chestnut brown hair that often fell into her pale blue eyes that seemed older than her years. She was slender, not from vanity, but from long days of running between her part-time job at a bookstore and school before tragedy tore those routines apart. Emily favored simple clothing, old jeans that had seen better days, loose sweaters in muted colors, and a pair of worn sneakers that once belonged to her father. Her posture carried both exhaustion and determination. Grief had hollowed her cheeks, but responsibility had sharpened her expression into one of quiet resilience. She had always been soft-spoken, the kind of girl who avoided conflict, but fate had decided to strip away her innocence and demand of her something harder, something unyielding. Her 3 brothers, though younger, already carried the weight of that same grief. Ethan, at 15, stood taller than most boys his age, with a lean, wiry frame and dark hair that he always pushed back impatiently. His face, still youthful, had taken on a sternness that did not belong to adolescence. Ethan had been his father's shadow, helping him with odd jobs, learning responsibility early. Quiet and practical, he seldom spoke unless his words mattered, a seriousness shaped by loss and the sudden absence of guidance he once relied on. Noah, 13, was the opposite, a boy with sandy blonde hair, freckles scattered across his nose, and eyes always alight with mischief, even through sorrow. He was quick to smile, quick to joke, as if laughter itself were a shield against despair. He strummed an old guitar more often than he studied, filling the nights with clumsy but heartfelt melodies. Caleb, the youngest at 10, was small for his age, with soft curls the color of wheat, and a face that betrayed every emotion like an open book. Sensitive and tender-hearted, Caleb often clung to Emily's side, asking questions no one could answer. Why God had taken their parents, why home no longer felt safe. Their parents' deaths had come swiftly and cruelly. A rainy night, a collision on the interstate, and suddenly Raymond and Linda Hayes, known in Charleston as hard-working, kind souls, were gone. Raymond, a broad-shouldered man with calloused hands from years in logistics and shipping, had been admired for his integrity. Linda, with her gentle voice and warm presence, had kept the family grounded. The news had spread quickly through the city, and though neighbors brought casseroles and condolences, none could offer what Emily truly needed, the return of stability. Within weeks, the Hayes household had changed from a place of comfort to a place of whispered fears and unanswered questions. It was during this fragile time that Robert Hayes arrived. Uncle Robert, Raymond's elder brother, was a man in his late 40s, tall but gone to seed, with thinning dark hair slicked back too tightly and a paunch pressing against his belt. His face bore lines not of hard work, but of worry and resentment, his small eyes always calculating. Robert carried himself with false authority, speaking in tones that suggested he knew best, though his reputation in Charleston was one of failed ventures and unpaid debts. Alongside him came his wife, Aunt Margaret. Margaret was in her early 40s, tall and thin, with a pinched face framed by severe blonde hair tied tightly at the nape. She dressed elegantly, pearls at her throat even when unnecessary, as though clinging to a social status she had long lost. Her smile never reached her cold gray eyes, and though her words dripped with false sweetness, her tone carried an undercurrent of disdain. Together, Robert and Margaret were predators circling wounded prey. Scout, The Hayes family's German shepherd, sensed this long before the children understood it. Scout was 7 years old, once a powerful working dog, now blind from a degenerative eye condition that had slowly stolen his sight. His coat was thick and gray-flecked, his ears still alert, and around his eyes Emily's father had once tied a strip of soft white cloth to protect the dog from irritation. A habit Emily maintained, giving him the appearance of a loyal sentinel veiled in mourning. Despite his blindness, Scout's senses were acute, his nose twitching at every unfamiliar scent, his head cocking at the faintest sounds. To Caleb, he was both comfort and guardian, a living piece of their father's love. The confrontation began one gray morning, the air heavy with salt and rain. Emily had been clearing out the parlor, folding blankets that still smelled faintly of her mother's perfume, when the door creaked open without a knock. Robert and Margaret stepped inside as though they owned the place. Robert's voice was falsely cheerful, the tone adults use when addressing children they do not respect. "Emily," he said, his lips curling into a smile that never reached his eyes. "You're looking tired, sweetheart." Such a heavy burden for someone so young. Emily straightened, her hands tightening on the blanket. "This is our home," she replied firmly, her voice sharper than she intended. "You don't have the right to just walk in." Margaret's laughter was soft and poisonous. "Oh, darling, it won't be your home for long. Robert and I have been reviewing the paperwork. It seems your father left no will, no documents transferring ownership. Legally, this property falls to the next of kin. That's Robert." She spoke with the satisfaction of someone who believed the battle already won. Ethan had appeared silently in the doorway, his fists clenched. Noah followed, trying to mask his fear with a mocking grin. Caleb, half hidden behind Scout, whispered, "Emily, what does she mean?" Scout's ears pricked, a low growl rising from his chest, as though he too understood the threat. Emily's heart hammered. She remembered clearly her father speaking of a will, showing her documents one summer evening, assuring her that everything would be taken care of. But in the chaos of funerals and grief, she had not thought to secure them. Now, Robert's smug expression told her that those papers had either vanished or been destroyed. Robert stepped closer, his cologne thick and cloying. "You're just 19, Em. You can barely provide for yourself, let alone these boys. The house is too much for you. Be reasonable. We'll take care of the children. You can visit." "No," Emily said, moving instinctively to stand between Robert and her brothers. Her voice trembled but did not break. "We're staying together. This house is ours." Robert's expression hardened, the mask slipping to reveal cold calculation. Margaret placed a manicured hand on his arm, murmuring, "Don't frighten her. It will all be settled soon enough." And indeed, it was settled, though not in Emily's favor. Within days, officials arrived with documents bearing seals and signatures, papers Emily could not fight. Sheriff's deputies, uncomfortable but bound by procedure, delivered the order of eviction. The neighbors whispered, some sympathetic, others eager to see scandal unfold. Among them stood Sheriff Nathaniel Davis, Charleston's police chief. Davis was 45, tall and broad-shouldered, his hair salt and pepper, and his face lined by years of service and personal sorrow. A widower, he carried himself with quiet authority, rarely smiling, but never cruel. His dark eyes missed little, and though he said little during the eviction, he watched Robert and Margaret with a suspicion that hinted at deeper instincts. Davis had seen men like Robert before, opportunists who cloaked greed in the false benevolence. As the children were ushered out of the house, carrying boxes of belongings and clutching blankets against the drizzle, Davis noticed Scout guiding Caleb carefully down the porch steps. The boy stumbled, but Scout leaned into him, steadying him with his body, though blind himself. Davis's brow furrowed. Something about this did not sit right. Emily led her brothers into the gray morning, rain dampening her sweater, her sneakers sinking into the soft earth. She carried a single suitcase in one hand, the leash of Scout in the other. Ethan walked silently, jaw tight. Noah hummed under his breath, though the melody was shaky. Caleb clutched the edge of Emily's sweater, eyes wide with fear. Behind them, Robert and Margaret stood on the porch, Robert's arm wrapped possessively around the railing, as if the house already belonged to him. For Emily, it felt like the world was collapsing again. She glanced once over her shoulder, memorizing the shape of the house, the shutters, the porch where her father used to drink coffee at sunrise. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to keep walking. She had promised her parents she would protect her brothers. Scout padded beside her, ears alert beneath the white cloth, a reminder that, though blind, he still saw more clearly than most. Sheriff Davis lingered a moment longer, his gaze moving from the departing children to the papers Robert clutched with such smugness. He had no proof yet, but his instincts told him this eviction was not justice. It was theft. And so, beneath the misty skies of Charleston, the Hayes children stepped into an uncertain future, stripped of their home but not their bond, while unseen forces began to stir, both those plotting their ruin and those quietly preparing to stand at their side. The Hayes children trudged through Charleston's damp streets under a drizzle that seemed to mock their sorrow, their few belongings packed into boxes and bags that cut into their hands. The house that had once been theirs shrank behind them, swallowed by mist and betrayal. By evening they found themselves in the old dockside district, where gulls wheeled above rotting pilings and the air was thick with the smell of brine and rust. It was here that Emily secured a place for them, a weather-beaten wooden cottage that leaned slightly toward the harbor, as if tired of holding itself upright. The cottage belonged to Mrs. Eleanor Whitaker, a landlady in her late 60s with a face tanned like leather and hair the color of sea foam, wild and untamed. She had once been a dock worker's wife, but after her husband died in a storm, she kept afloat by renting rooms to anyone desperate enough to live by the wharves. Her back was bent, her hands knotted with arthritis, yet her eyes were sharp, a clear gray that seemed to pierce through lies. Though stern at first, she agreed to let the Hayes children rent the cottage for far less than market price, muttering that orphans shouldn't be bled dry by vultures. She showed them around with brusque efficiency, pointing out the stove that worked only half the time, the leaky roof patched with tar, and the window that rattled when the wind blew. Caleb clutched Emily's hand the entire time, his wide eyes scanning the shadows, while Scout nosed through the rooms, his tail wagging despite the dampness. Emily found work within a week at the Pelican's Table, a bustling seafood restaurant near the docks. The owner, Mr. Franklin Moore, was a stout man in his 50s with a booming laugh and a permanent red flush across his cheeks from years of drink. He hired Emily more out of pity than need, handing her an apron and warning her that the work would be hard and the tips unreliable. Franklin's wife Darlene helped in the kitchen, a broad-shouldered woman with short curly hair and flour permanently dusting her apron. Though rough in manner, she treated Emily kindly, slipping her leftover bread and stew to take home. Emily would spend her nights weaving between tables of fishermen and tourists, her feet aching, her mind always drifting to her brothers, waiting at home. Ethan took to delivering newspapers at dawn. The boy's lanky frame and quick stride made him suited for the job, though the icy morning winds bit into him as he pedaled his borrowed bicycle through the narrow streets. His boss, Mr. Callahan, a wiry man with spectacles perched on his long nose, barely acknowledged him beyond handing over bundles of papers. Ethan didn't mind. He preferred silence. He woke before everyone else, slipping out quietly, returning with just enough coins to contribute to groceries. Though he never said it, he felt the weight of being the man of the house, the one who had to stand between his siblings and the world's cruelties. Noah, in his restless energy, began playing his guitar at the evening markets. The guitar was cracked along one edge, its strings worn thin, but when he played, people stopped to listen. Vendors at the docks, hardened by years of shouting prices and chasing profit, often softened when Noah's voice carried across the stalls. There was an elderly fisherman, Thomas Reed, who always dropped $1 into Noah's guitar case. Reed was tall and thin as a mast, his beard white and tangled, his skin sun-beaten. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his voice was deep and kind. "Your music chases away the ghosts of the sea," he told Noah once. Those few words burned into the boy's heart, making him feel that perhaps his songs mattered. Caleb had the hardest time adjusting. The youngest by far, he cried himself to sleep most nights, whispering for his mother. During the day, he wandered the narrow lanes near the harbor, trailing after Emily or Ethan, clutching Scout's leash as if it tethered him to safety. His grief came in bursts, sudden tears when a gull swooped too low, or when the tide carried in driftwood that looked like broken bones. Scout stayed closest to him, padding beside him with uncanny intuition. The dog's blindness did not hinder his loyalty. His ears swiveled to every sound, and when Caleb tripped on uneven boards by the pier one evening, Scout lunged forward, blocking the boy's fall and barking until Ethan rushed to help. It was then Emily realized Scout was not simply a reminder of her father. He was a guardian angel clothed in fur. The days blurred into one another. Emily worked double shifts, her hands raw from scrubbing tables, her body so weary she sometimes fell asleep sitting up. Yet every night, when she returned to the cottage, she forced a smile for her brothers. "We're still a family," she would whisper, tucking Caleb into bed, brushing hair from his damp forehead. "No matter where we are, this is home." Ethan would nod solemnly, Noah would grin and play a silly tune, and for a moment, the illusion of normalcy held. It was during one of these weary evenings that danger brushed close. Caleb, restless, had slipped outside to the street corner, Scout at his side. A shadowed figure, a man reeking of alcohol, his clothes ragged and his eyes glassy, stumbled toward him, muttering incoherently. The man's hand darted forward as if to grab Caleb's arm, but before he could touch, Scout erupted into furious barking, his teeth bared, his body pressing Caleb back toward safety. The drunkard recoiled, swore, and staggered away, leaving Caleb trembling, but unharmed. When Emily rushed out moments later, she found Caleb clutching Scout tightly, tears streaming down his cheeks. "He saved me," Caleb whispered over and over. That night, Scout was fed scraps of fish and bread as though he were royalty. Sheriff Nathaniel Davis entered their lives again, not long afterward. One afternoon, Emily was balancing trays of oysters and clam chowder at the Pelican's table when she saw him seated at the counter, a tall figure in a plain suit, his badge clipped discreetly to his belt. His salt and pepper hair caught the light from the window, his face drawn in lines of both sternness and compassion. He ordered coffee, his voice low and steady. Emily tried to avoid him, embarrassed by her worn uniform and the way exhaustion showed in her posture. Yet Davis caught her eye as she refilled his cup. "You're Raymond Hayes's daughter," he said quietly. Emily froze, then nodded. "I remember your father. Honest man. He deserved better." His eyes flicked toward the papers folded neatly on the counter, reports about property transfers and debts. "Your uncle and aunt, Robert and Margaret, do you trust them?" Emily shook her head instinctively, though she dared not speak too loudly. "They took everything," she whispered. Davis studied her for a long moment, then set money on the counter and rose. "I thought as much. They've been in trouble before. Nasty trail of debts. People who owe as much as they do rarely stop at honesty." He paused at the doorway, his silhouette framed by the harbor's mist. "Stay strong, Emily. Some wrongs don't stay buried forever." Then he was gone, leaving Emily shaken yet strangely reassured. That night, as she sat with her brothers in the dim light of a single oil lamp, Emily repeated her promise. "We are still a family, and we'll make it. I don't know how, but we will." Ethan sat tall, his eyes steady. Noah strummed a tune that wove through the flickering shadows. Caleb curled against Scout, who lay with his muzzle resting protectively on the boy's leg. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, but inside the cottage, there was warmth. And though poverty and fear pressed against their walls, something stronger held them together, hope, fragile but unbroken. The nights by the harbor were colder now, the mist thick enough to curl around lampposts and seep into the cottage's drafty windows. The Hayes children had grown accustomed to the sound of waves slapping against the piers, but that week the sea seemed more restless than usual, as though mirroring their unease. Emily worked herself ragged, Ethan kept his silence, Caleb clung to Scout, and Noah, ever the dreamer, had begun scribbling lyrics in the margins of his school notebooks. What none of them expected was that Noah, of all people, would stumble across a clue that might change everything. It happened on a damp evening after the market. Noah returned home with his guitar slung across his back, coins jangling in his pocket, and a triumphant grin across his freckled face. He'd drawn a crowd, more than usual, and one vendor had even pressed a loaf of sweet bread into his hands as thanks for keeping spirits up. Emily was washing dishes in a chipped enamel basin, humming softly despite her exhaustion, when Noah dropped onto the floor and began to restring his battered guitar. As he did, a sheet of yellowed paper slipped from inside the instrument's hollow body, crinkling as it hit the floorboards. "What's that?" Emily asked, drying her hands quickly. Noah shrugged, unfolding it with care. His grin faded, replaced by wide-eyed seriousness. "Looks old. Dad's signature is on it." Ethan crossed the room in 2 strides, his jaw tightening. Caleb hovered nearby, peering anxiously while Scout pressed against his legs. Emily took the document and spread it flat under the lamplight. The paper was a contract, aged but legible, bearing the name Raymond Hayes alongside that of a shipping company called Atlantic Seafarers Logistics Limited. The document stated that Raymond Hayes was a co-owner, holding 35% of the company's shares. Emily's breath caught. Dad owned part of a shipping company? Why didn't we know this? Ethan's voice was low and angry. Because Robert and Margaret didn't want us to. They said there were debts, but if Dad had shares in a company, why would we be broke? Caleb's small voice trembled. Does this mean we're not really poor? Emily pulled him close, smoothing his hair. It means something isn't right. It means we need to find out the truth. That night, after Caleb was asleep, the 3 older siblings pored over the document, whispering about what it might mean. Noah tapped his pencil against the table, his restless energy flowing into words. This changes everything. Dad wasn't broke. Someone made it look like he was. Emily nodded slowly, the weight of realization pressing down. Their father had planned better than anyone realized, but his intentions had been buried, perhaps literally, under forged papers and deceit. The next morning, Emily carried the contract in her satchel, her nerves buzzing. On her way back from work, she felt that prickling sensation along the spine that told her she wasn't alone. Scout, trotting beside her with his white cloth tied neatly around his blind eyes, stiffened suddenly, his head swiveling toward the shadows between 2 warehouses. A low growl rumbled from his chest. Emily froze, clutching the satchel. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught movement. A figure retreating quickly into the fog, coat collar pulled high, footsteps fading against the cobblestones. Her heart pounded, but Scout barked furiously, pulling her toward home with surprising strength. When she finally shut the cottage door behind her, she leaned against it, shaken. Someone had been following her. Someone knew she had the document. Later that week, Sheriff Nathaniel Davis returned to the Pelican's table. Emily spotted him as she refilled water glasses. He looked weary, his salt and pepper hair damp from rain, his dark suit smelling faintly of tobacco. When she slipped him a cup of coffee, he spoke quietly, his voice grave. "Emily, I've been digging. I checked the court records for your father's estate. Do you know what I found?" She shook her head, pulse quickening. "Nothing," Davis said. "No probate case, no filings, no public notices. It's as though your father's estate never existed on paper." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "That's impossible. For property like yours, for debts or shares in a company, there would be documents. The absence means someone buried it deep and deliberately." Emily swallowed hard, whispering back, "Then what do we do?" Davis studied her with those piercing eyes, compassion hidden behind his sternness. "For now, you keep your head down. Gather everything you can. Paper trails don't vanish completely." He slipped a card onto the counter. "If you find more, call me directly." That night, Emily told her brothers. Ethan's jaw clenched tighter, his fists curling. So it's all a lie. Robert and Margaret stole everything. Noah tapped the guitar strings thoughtfully, a tune already forming in his mind. Then maybe it's time people started hearing our story. Noah began performing differently at the night markets. His songs, once playful and light, now carried weight. He sang of a family robbed, of promises broken, of children cast into the cold. His voice, raw and trembling, struck chords in listeners' hearts. Soon crowds gathered, not just to hear music, but to listen to the truth hidden within his lyrics. The old fisherman Thomas Reed spread the word, telling anyone who'd listen that the boys' songs were more than entertainment, they were warnings, cries for justice. By the end of the month, Noah's music had become a quiet current running through Charleston, people murmuring about the Hayes children, about the uncle and aunt who'd thrown them out. One evening, after a particularly powerful performance, a woman named Sarah Collins approached Noah. Sarah was in her late 30s, tall and willowy, with auburn hair tied loosely at the nape and a face marked by both kindness and fatigue. She wore simple clothes, a faded green dress and a wool shawl, her hands calloused from work at the textile mill. Years earlier, she had lost her husband in a dockyard accident and had raised her 2 daughters alone, carrying herself with quiet dignity despite hardship. She leaned down toward Noah's open guitar case, dropping in a folded piece of paper along with a few coins. "Your father was an honest man," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "People need to remember that." Then she slipped away into the crowd before he could reply. When Noah unfolded the paper at home, he found a note. "I worked once with your father's company. Ask about the year 2012. There were deals made then, not all clean." The siblings stared at one another, the lamplight flickering across their faces. The shadows around them seemed darker, yet for the first time in months, hope glimmered. Their father's truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered. And though danger pressed closer, though strangers lurked in misty alleys and secrets seemed ready to swallow them whole, Emily felt her resolve harden. Scout rested her head on his lap, ears twitching as though in agreement. "We're going to find the truth," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "For Dad. For us. For everything they stole." The harbor was restless that week, storms rolling in from the Atlantic, with winds that rattled the windows of the Hayes cottage and sent salt spray against the cracked glass panes. Emily often found herself standing at the window long after her brothers had gone to sleep, watching the lighthouse beams sweep across the dark waters. She felt the weight of the document Noah had uncovered in every breath she took, proof that her father's legacy had not been poverty, but something far greater. Now the question was how deep the lies went and who had buried them. It was Davis who gave her the name, Samuel Harris. He had once been her father's attorney, a man known for his sharp mind and steady ethics, though he had disappeared from public life after a scandal 5 years earlier. "If anyone knew the truth about your father's estate," Davis told her, "it was Harris." He drew up most of Raymond's contracts. Finding him was not easy. Harris had retreated to a weather-beaten bungalow on the outskirts of Charleston, tucked behind a wall of untrimmed hedges. The paint on the shutters peeled, the roof sagged, and the yard was littered with old legal books damp from years of neglect. Harris himself was a shadow of the man Emily remembered faintly from her childhood. Tall but stooped, his once dark hair gone completely silver, his hands shaking as he opened the door. His face was hollowed by guilt, his eyes watery, bloodshot from both age and too much whiskey. At first, Harris refused to speak. "I'm retired. I don't take cases," he muttered, trying to close the door. But Davis, standing behind Emily with his sheriff's badge glinting faintly in the dusk, pressed a firm hand against the frame. "This isn't about new cases. It's about old sins," he said quietly. Raymond Hayes' children deserve the truth. Emily, clutching the contract Noah had found, held it out with trembling hands. "Please, Mr. Harris, my father trusted you. Did you betray him?" Harris froze at her words, his shoulders slumping as though they carried the weight of decades. He let them inside. The bungalow's air was thick with dust and stale tobacco, law books piled in precarious stacks on every surface. Scout padded in quietly, his blind eyes hidden beneath the white cloth, settling beside Caleb, who had insisted on coming despite his fear. Harris poured himself a drink with shaking hands, but didn't touch it. He stared into the amber liquid, his voice cracking. "I swore I'd never talk about it, but I see now. Silence has made me a coward." His eyes flicked up to Emily's, and for the first time, shame broke through his weariness. "Yes, your Uncle Robert came to me after your father's death. He paid me, handsomely, to destroy the real will and prepare papers that would make it seem as if your father had died without one." Emily felt her knees weaken, Ethan's arm tightening around her shoulder. "Why?" she whispered. "Because Raymond had established a trust," Harris said, the words spilling out now, as though confessing purged a sickness from his soul. "A massive trust, more than $50 million, secured through his shares in Atlantic Seafarers' logistics, investments, and insurance policies. He left it all for his children to be released when certain conditions were met. Robert knew if the truth stood, he and Margaret would see none of it. So, they paid me to erase it. His hands shook so violently the glass tumbled from his fingers, shattering on the floor. I destroyed your father's work. I betrayed his memory, and I have lived in disgrace ever since Emily's chest heaved, rage and grief boiling together. You let us starve while they lived in comfort. Harris buried his face in his hands. I was drowning in debt. Robert promised it was only paperwork, that you children would be better off with guardians who could manage money. I wanted to believe him. God help me. I wanted to believe Davis's face was grim as stone. You understand, Mr. Harris, this confession won't stay in this room. Harris gave a hollow laugh. Do what you must. My life is already over. But maybe theirs won't be back in town. Emily discovered Robert and Margaret had already begun their counterattack. Flyers appeared in market stalls and whispers spread in taverns. Emily Hayes is greedy, unstable, unfit to care for her brothers. Aunt Margaret, always skilled at social appearances, claimed to neighbors that Emily was delusional and trying to dig up lies for money. Robert told anyone who would listen that Emily was too young, too ambitious, and too reckless to be trusted. The lies cut deep. At the Pelicans table, customers stared longer, whispered when she passed. One evening, a group of fishermen refused to be served by her, muttering that she was a schemer. Emily swallowed her shame, forcing herself to keep moving, though every insult stung. The slander escalated into something darker. One fog-heavy night, as Emily walked home along the narrow lane near the wharf, two men stepped out from the shadows. They were strangers, burly, broad-shouldered, with cheap suits and the smell of smoke clinging to them. One had a scar running down his cheek, the other a crooked nose that had clearly been broken more than once. "Miss Hayes," the scarred man sneered, "we heard you've been stirring up trouble. Some folks think you'd be better off quiet." Before Emily could react, Scout erupted. Despite his blindness, the German shepherd hurled himself forward with a ferocity that startled even Emily. His jaws snapped, his growls deep and vicious. The men stumbled back, cursing, one swinging a boot that caught Scout in the side. The dog yelped but lunged again, teeth grazing the man's sleeve. Emily seized the chance, shouting for help. The sound of approaching footsteps, Davis, who had been making his evening rounds, sent the men fleeing into the mist. Emily dropped to her knees beside Scout, trembling as she checked him. His side was bruised, but the dog wagged his tail weakly, pressing his muzzle against her hands. Tears blurred her eyes. "You saved me again," she whispered. Davis knelt beside her, his face etched with fury. "This isn't just slander anymore. It's intimidation." He looked at Emily with a rare gentleness. "You won't face this alone. I'll see to it." In the days that followed, Davis began spending more time near the Hayes cottage. He kept his distance from Emily's pride, but his presence was steady, a quiet reassurance. Caleb, still haunted by nightmares of losing his parents, found unexpected comfort in the sheriff's company. Davis would sit with him on the porch steps, pointing out the stars between drifting clouds. "Do you know their names?" Caleb asked one night, his voice hushed. Davis smiled faintly, sadness flickering in his eyes. "My wife used to love the stars. She died a few years ago. Since then, I've tried to remember what she taught me. That one, there's Orion. And that's Sirius, the brightest one." The dog star Caleb leaned closer, Scout resting his head on the boy's lap. "Do you think Mom and Dad are up there?" Davis hesitated, then placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "I think they're watching you, and I think they'd be proud." For the first time in months, Caleb's breathing eased as he drifted to sleep against Scout's warm side. Emily, watching from the doorway, felt gratitude well within her chest. Davis wasn't just a sheriff anymore. He was slowly becoming part of the fragile circle that held them together. By week's end, the Hayes children had one undeniable truth. Their father's fortune still existed, bound in a trust worth $50 million. And though enemies spread lies and danger stalked them in the shadows, Emily knew they were closer than ever to justice. The Charleston courthouse stood like a sentinel on Meeting Street, its white columns streaked with the grime of countless storms and decades of whispers. On the morning of the trial, the square outside was packed with townsfolk and reporters, umbrellas bobbing in the drizzle. Emily smoothed the wrinkles from her second-hand navy dress, her hands trembling as she clutched the folder of documents Davis had helped her prepare. Behind her, her brothers walked with quiet determination. Ethan tall and serious, Noah carrying his guitar case as if it were armor, and Caleb clinging to Scout's leash. The German shepherd moved confidently despite his blindness, the white cloth tied across his eyes fluttering slightly in the breeze. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and rain-soaked coats. The judge, a stern woman named Eleanor Whitfield, presided from her bench. Judge Whitfield was in her late 50s, with steel-gray hair pinned in a bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Known in Charleston for her fairness and a reputation for dismantling dishonest attorneys, she carried herself with unshakable authority. When she entered, the room hushed instantly. Robert and Margaret sat at the defense table, both impeccably dressed, their lawyer whispering furiously in their ears. Robert's face was ruddy with anger, his jaw clenched tight. Margaret wore pearls and a carefully painted smile that didn't reach her eyes. Yet the rumors that had once tarnished Emily seemed to hold no weight here. The townspeople filled the gallery, many remembering Noah's haunting songs or the whispers that had spread through the market. Sarah Collins sat among them, her auburn hair pulled neatly back, her daughters at her side. She gave Emily a small nod of encouragement, her presence a silent reminder that the truth had allies. The trial unfolded with painstaking detail. Davis testified first, his deep voice steady as he outlined his investigation. The missing probate records, the inconsistencies in financial transfers, the intimidation attempts. "In my years as sheriff," he said firmly, "I've seen many disputes. But what was done to the Hayes children was not guardianship. It was theft hidden under the guise of family." Then Samuel Harris took the stand. His frailty was evident as he shuffled forward, leaning on a cane, but his voice carried when it mattered. "I destroyed Raymond Hayes's true will," he admitted, his eyes wet. "I was paid to make his children orphans twice over, once by fate and once by fraud. I will regret it until my last breath." His testimony drew gasps, and Margaret's painted smile cracked. Ethan followed, presenting careful notes he had kept since the day they were evicted. Dates, conversations, small details. A 15-year-old boy should never have needed to remember. His quiet diligence impressed the jury. Noah then brought out the contract discovered in his guitar, and when the defense tried to dismiss it as coincidence, Noah did something unexpected. He sang. With Judge Whitfield's cautious permission, he strummed the strings and performed the song he had written about their family's struggle, his voice echoing through the hushed chamber. The lyrics painted images of children huddled in a damp cottage, of Scout barking at shadows, of Emily working until she collapsed, all while their inheritance was stolen. Some jurors wiped their eyes. Even the stenographer paused, her fingers trembling over the keys. Caleb, though the youngest, had insisted on speaking. Standing beside Scout, his small hand clutching the dog's leash, he read a letter he had written the night before. "My sister Emily promised we'd stay together. She gave us everything when we had nothing. All we want is what Dad wanted for us, that we be safe and that we help others too." His voice cracked, but Scout's steady presence at his side seemed to give him courage. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicking as the image of the blind dog beside the smallest Hayes boy burned into the town's collective memory. The next morning, headlines would declare, "Blind dog sees justice. Scout the shepherd protects family in court." When Robert took the stand, his arrogance cracked quickly under cross-examination. Judge Whitfield's questions were precise and merciless. "Mr. Hayes, if you believed your brother left no assets, why did you and your wife suddenly acquire 2 new properties and pay off old debts within months of his death?" Robert fumbled, sweat beading on his forehead. Margaret broke under pressure even faster, admitting she had signed off on bank transfers she didn't fully understand. The facade crumbled piece by piece until the truth lay bare. After 2 tense days, the jury returned. The courtroom held its breath as the foreman rose. We find in favor of the plaintiffs, Emily Hayes and her brothers, on all counts. The words seemed to echo. Emily exhaled as though she had been holding her breath for years. Caleb burst into tears, clinging to Scout's neck. Noah whispered, "Dad, we did it," as if their father could hear. Ethan simply closed his eyes, his jaw relaxing for the first time in months. Judge Whitfield's ruling went further. The trust established by Raymond Hayes was to be honored in full, its $50 million restored to his children with accumulated interest. In addition, Robert and Margaret were ordered to repay damages for fraud and intimidation, their assets seized to cover penalties. The old house by the sea, once stolen, would be returned to the Hayes family. Outside the courthouse, the drizzle had turned to sunlight, golden rays breaking through gray clouds. Reporters crowded forward, but Emily stood firm, Scout at her side, her brothers around her. She spoke clearly, her voice strong. This isn't just about us. This is about every family who has been broken by lies and greed. My father taught us that integrity is worth more than gold. Today we prove that, weeks later, the Hayes children stood once more before their seaside home. Its shutters were faded, the porch sagging, but to them it was a palace. They crossed the threshold together, Scout bounding ahead as if he could see the way. Emily whispered, "We're home," her voice trembling with relief. Charleston soon buzzed with celebration. To honor the victory and the town's resilience, a community gathering was organized on the green by the harbor. Lanterns swayed from poles, music floated through the air, and laughter replaced months of whispers. Noah took the stage first, his guitar gleaming in the twilight. His voice soared across the crowd as he sang not just of sorrow, but of survival, his lyrics now carrying hope. Ethan stepped forward afterward, speaking firmly of responsibility, of how young people could bear great burdens, but still rise. Caleb followed, clutching a handwritten note. His voice was soft but clear as he thanked the town for listening, and most of all, his sister for never letting go. Finally, Emily spoke, her figure framed by the lantern glow. She wore a simple white dress, her long brown hair loose around her shoulders. Her eyes shone with conviction. This inheritance is not just ours. It belongs to every family who has been told they are powerless. We promise to use it so that no child, no sibling, no orphan ever has to face what we faced. Applause thundered, echoing across the harbor. Davis, standing near the stage, watched with quiet pride. In the weeks since the trial, he had become more than protector. His steady presence, his kindness to Caleb, his unwavering belief in Emily had rooted him in their lives. That night, when Emily stepped down from the stage, Davis met her with a rare smile. "Your father would be proud," he said. She looked at him, truly looked, and for the first time in years, allowed herself to imagine a future where she didn't have to carry the weight alone. And Scout, battered, blind, but unbroken, rested at their feet, his white blindfold catching the lantern light. To the townsfolk, he became more than a dog. He was a symbol of loyalty and resilience, a reminder that sometimes even those without sight see truer than those with eyes. In the end, Emily and her brothers discovered that what seemed like the greatest tragedy was also the path to their greatest blessing. It was not only the courtroom victory or the inheritance that saved them, but the faith, love, and courage that God planted in their hearts when everything else was taken away. Sometimes the miracles of the Lord are not thunder from the sky, but the quiet strength He gives to a young girl to protect her family, the loyalty of a blind dog who sees the truth, and the kindness of strangers who choose justice over fear. In our daily lives, we all face struggles that feel impossible to carry. But this story reminds us that when we walk in faith, when we trust God even in the darkest night, He provides light for our next step. Miracles may not always look like sudden riches or victories in court. Sometimes they are the simple gift of another day, the hug of a loved one, the food on the table, or the courage to keep going. If you believe God still works miracles today, if you believe that His love can heal broken families and restore hope, let this story be a testimony. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that love and faith can overcome betrayal and loss. Please comment below with one word of faith. Write Amen if you believe God can turn pain into promise. Subscribe to this channel Share this story with your friends and family, and may God bless you and your loved ones with peace, strength, and hope.